My name is Massimo Rigoli, and I will be presenting to you Between Hero and Villain about Confucianism and China under the communist rule. Okay, so yeah, Between Hero and Villain, Confucius under Chinese communism. So first, what you see here is a graph outlined, and what it is doing is it tracks the number of publications related to Confucianism as a subject. Sometimes it's under a positive light, sometimes under a negative light. But overall, you see the number of publications through the years under the Chinese communist system of China. It runs from the years 1957 to 2021. And you'll notice that there are a few trends in the graph under certain years. I noticed that there are far more publications than other years. Sometimes it spikes, sometimes it declines. And I basically just tracked down what was going on at the time period that might be an explanation for why there might be more publications relating to Confucian publications. And so this is a little different from what was actually on my research paper. Under my research paper, it ran from the years 1949 to 2021, 1949 being the year that the People's Republic of China was established. And also I actually tracked the number of Taiwanese publications in order to have a contrast and see how it relates, whether it was under communist rule or republic. And yeah, but overall, I did calculate the number of publications. It was pretty similar. I noticed the years of which there were higher publications than others. And so why does this matter? Well, Confucius himself was a prominent role in shaping overall China's government and policy and lawmaking. He was a key figure in principle and philosophy. He was born in 551 BC and he died in 479 BC. So he lived to about 72 years old. And his works weren't actually canonized, however, until 200 years later during the Han Dynasty. But what was so influential was his teachings about filial piety. Now, filial piety at its core is teaching how to basically respect and have an admirance towards your elders and your family. And the reason why is because he believed this was the best way in order to ensure solidarity and overall a respect for your elders, community, and society as a whole through respecting those above you in authority. Now, this served as the quintessential paradigm for many Chinese emperors after the Han Dynasty. And it would even go on to shape education in China through later on, quite a few centuries later, but the civil service exam, which essentially was a test that determined how well your values and understanding of Confucianism was. And this basically determined what your performance in society was, how you would contribute to your community and overall respect for your family. And yeah, it was essentially a standardized test. So yeah, so Confucius was heavily influential from 200 BC to all the way till 1949. However, by 1949, China had undergone great changes and transitioned to, instead of an imperial system and a republic only 30 years earlier, but eventually a communist regime under Mao Zedong in 1949. And Mao took a very neutral approach at first, as he did have an admirance for Confucianism himself, just from when he was 20 years old and studying his teachings and philosophy. However, he felt that it was so divisive and controversial a topic that it was just something to refrain from mentioning, as it may only cause trouble. And also, he saw potential in how it could be used how it could be utilized under his communist regime, as its values his values teach about respect for family and society, and he saw this as very similar to communist ideals and how you should benefit from society value and family value. So he saw the two could intertwine. So Confucianism was basically neglected at first. However, that would change as history would guide his hand. So yeah, overall, hands-off approach, because he needed to give his undivided attention to establishing legitimacy for the communist China regime but he saw value in possible Marxist principles. But eventually, by the time of 1956, China was undergoing a lot of social turmoil and this concept known as brain drain, which saw limited intellectual thought and ideas. So in response, Mao launched the 100 Flowers campaign. And what this essentially was, it actually gave, during this period of time, Chinese citizens the opportunity to express their actual opinions and thought of how the Chinese government was doing. And not only this, but it also gave them the opportunity to explore ancient Chinese plays, art, national heroes, and also even philosophy, including Confucianism. And over time, people would actually eventually grow bold and publish even more about this. So Confucius saw this revival after about a decade of Mao's rule due to just turmoil and the circumstances that were happening. A few years later, Mao Zedong, Confucius would increase even more, as unfortunately Mao launched what was known as the Great Leap Forward. Originally, it was an attempt to advance in agriculture China. It had many projects and works that attempted to, just advance in it, and water projects. However, they failed due to crops could not yield. The overall projects just failed, and it actually eventually would, due to crop failure, it would result in the deaths of millions, estimated between 30 to 45 million due to mass famine. So it was a failure and a disaster. And because of this, people started to question and oppose Mao's leadership of government, as it had caused so many deaths. And Mao saw this as a threat. So he utilized Confucius. As mentioned earlier, Confucius values obedience and respect towards authority, your family, community, and society. So Mao spread this, he used this as a technique to actually sort of subdue the people's oppression. And he used it to actually have them respect him more. So he used Confucius in his favor, which he also does later on as well. And that lasted from 1958 to 63. And a few years later, however, by 1966, Mao decided to launch the Cultural Revolution. Now, what the Cultural Revolution was, is Mao had seen anything of ancient China, similar to 1949, he wanted to shift away from ancient China, but first he needed to legitimize and consolidate power. Now he had consolidated this power. So he took the opportunity to rid of any vestiges of ancient China, which included Confucius, which he criticized in his overall campaign. And so, he decided to transition now in his favor to have more power for himself. He decided to condemn Confucius now. So you see this case where Mao is sort of manipulating Confucius, I guess, in order to consolidate all the power for himself. However, this actually ironically had an opposite effect, as while he was trying to condemn Confucius, in order to defeat your enemy, you have to legitimize or have to see them as a legitimate threat, which Mao had to do. And also he had to understand what Confucius' teachings were in order to properly defame him. And so Mao, there was even more publishings in the name of condemning him, but overall there were more publications, and while it was criticism, it was recognition. And so during the Cultural Revolution, Confucius actually he gained even more of a following as a result, basically, which wasn't Mao's intended goal, but it's what happened. But eventually Mao Zedong would actually die in 1976 at the age of 82, which ended the Cultural Revolution. And as a result of Mao's death, this left a power vacuum opened. Quite a few groups just attempted to consolidate power, one of them being the Gang of Four, which was actually led by Mao's wife. However, Chinese revolutionary Deng Xiaoping actually emerged on top in 1976. And Deng Xiaoping is important for Confucianism because he actually increased people's education and understanding of him even more. As in 1977, he reintroduced the Gaokao system. And what the Gaokao system is it's similar to the civil service exam mentioned in Imperial China times, where basically it's determining your understanding and knowledge of Confucian values and how you will contribute to your family, community, and society as a whole. And yeah, it was actually introduced in 1952, but it was canceled in 1966 as that was Mao's Cultural Revolution. But Deng Xiaoping brought it back, and it's been back since 1977. And not only that, but by the 1980s, Confucius grew even more in prominence as China saw reform in economic policy. And Confucius and China as a whole was actually growing as this global superpower by the 1980s. And Confucius teachings were associated with that. So Confucius influence was growing even more in the 1980s. And eventually in 1989, there was the event known as Tiananmen Square, which was student protests demanding rights for more democratic reform. Overall, it was actually catastrophic to China because it resulted in deaths of students. There's not an exact number known, but it was definitely bad. And however, Confucius actually grew in prominence even more off of that because, once again, similar to how people were revolting and opposing government under the Great Leap Forward, under Mao's rule, people were doing that once more. But Confucius, again, can be used as this figure to shun out and deny any opposing towards government. And people actually have this admirance for it instead. Now, today, historically, Confucius has been divisive. He's been glorified and condemned at many points in history, but he eventually would go on to still be influential by the time of Mao's death in the 1980s, and since then, he's grown even more. It's interesting that his teachings can have been used to both support and undermine the government, depending on the circumstances and overall what's going on within Chinese society as a whole. But overall, he's always been a figure that's been kept in mind when establishing policy and law, and he's considered a guiding policy principle for this, actually. And he's still a key influential figure to all these leaders mentioned, whether it's Mao Zedong, Deng Xiaoping, and even today's leader, Xi Jinping. In fact, he serves as this model, a paradigm for society towards morality and justice in society. His teachings of filial piety greatly benefit and help guide towards that. He's been avoided at some points under Mao's rule, controversial and condemned, but eventually respected. In fact, Xi Jinping has even said that today's leader, that he is a key figure in education, and he believes it can bring peace and union to not only China, but the world. And so Confucius continues to be so influential in contemporary China, and he may well be more influential in the near future in China. And that is it. Thank you for your attention, and CCIR for running this program.
Thank you, Massimo, for an excellent presentation and for your patience getting with working with the audio. I know technical issues can be difficult. I just wanted to really say, very impressive presentation. I think it's incredibly important to look at how governments view historical figures, especially philosophers, to justify their current projects. And it was really interesting to hear about how it is that the image of Confucius has changed over time and been perhaps distorted, perhaps shown in different ways to again, like I said, justify those state projects of China. So thank you.